right, welcome to the Strength Athlete Podcast, episode 15. Today we're going to be discussing some of the practical applications, dispelling some myths, and just generally talking about weight cutting as it relates to powerlifting. I'm very excited for our guest that we have on with us today. His name is Reid Reale. He has insisted that we do not call him professor as he has not finished his Ph.D. just yet, but he is the senior scientist with Gatorade Sports Science Institute, and he is just doing a tremendous amount of work with relate to weight cutting in particular, putting out studies and more or less finding out from a practical standpoint, what really can we do in terms of weight reduction and what can we expect in terms of performance when we are kind of ticking these boxes and working on reducing this weight to try to hit these weight classes, and how can we best do that? So Reid, if you want to say hello.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for reaching out and having me on the podcast.
Reid, we
got Bryce and Joe with us as well, boys.
Hello. Reid, it was a pleasure to read through one of your studies and just see some of the overview of what the research presents in terms of weight loss and how it can affect performance. And I'm looking forward to getting into some of that dialogue today.
Yes, this has been my life for the past 3 or 4 years academically, and prior to that as a jiu-jitsu athlete personally in my sporting career. So I love this stuff and I'm really excited to get into it.
So what got you interested in studying weight cutting?
So like I mentioned, I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athlete. I received my black belt about 2 years ago. I've been competing for about 10 years in total, or maybe closer to 11 or 12 years. As a Jiu-Jitsu athlete, we compete in weight divisions as do powerlifters and weightlifters. And coming up through the ranks as a jiu-jitsu athlete, I always found myself in between weight divisions, and so obviously the temptation is to try and cut weight to decrease a weight division or drop to a weight division below, so you get to fight the smaller guy. And I was also working as a personal trainer and had quite a strong interest in strength training and bodybuilding and this sort of stuff. So I was always really fascinated with the physiology of it all, and rather than just I guess sitting in a sauna to cut weight, I was always fascinated with the underlying physiology and how that worked. And so then throughout my university years, I studied dietetics, and so I'm an accredited practicing dietitian in Australia. And then following that, I had the opportunity to complete a Ph.D. Series of studies at the Australian Institute of Sport with the combat centre there, so working with our Olympic combat sport athletes. And so it was a natural fit for me as a jiu-jitsu athlete, interested in weight cutting, and a dietitian to also go down that route. And so my PhD focused solely on acute weight loss or weight cutting for combat sports.
Beautiful.
If I can interrupt before we move too far forward, just a quick shout out to our sponsor for the podcast, LVD Fitness. You can check them out at www.lvdfitness.com. They are giving clean water to those in need for every single item they sell. Additionally, if you are listening to us on iTunes, if you want to leave us a 5-star review, we would greatly appreciate it. Those really do help us to be seen and help us to put out more episodes. So just wanted to toss that in there, and we can get right back on topic. So Reid, from just in the simplest terms you can come up with, what is a weight cut, and why do we do it? This can be for jiu-jitsu, this could be for Olympic weightlifting, which you were just saying you've had some firsthand experience with. Why are people motivated to cut weight for competitions?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's to gain some sort of a competitive advantage. And this competitive advantage comes from, as I alluded to, competing in a weight class lower than what your day-to-day or training weight would place you in. The whole reason why weight divisions exist is to create an even playing field, because in these sports, there's some sort of advantage to being taller, stronger, bigger, and I guess at the end of the day, weighing more. So if there was no advantage to body weight, there would be no need for weight classes. The fact that there is weight classes means that if you can compete in a lower weight class than you otherwise would, you're going to gain some sort of advantage.
Excellent. I think that's a pretty simple description, and I like the way you described it as gaining an advantage by reducing your body weight, because we see a lot of people who just have their mindset on some fictitious body weight number, and despite the fact that they won't be any more competitive at the lighter weight class, they're just fixated on moving down. And it's interesting because a lot of people are kind of self-sabotaging in that way, where they're consistently insisting on dropping that 10 pounds in the 4 weeks before the competition and keeping themselves from necessarily maybe realizing the progress they've made in the gym or in practice. Maybe this applies to something like jiu-jitsu from your own personal experience, that added dehydration kind of taking away from their ability to display what they've been practicing.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I was just going to say, it's all a balancing act. It's all a balancing act. Everything's positives and negatives. And the thing with weight category sports is you don't necessarily have to perform at your absolute best, but it's a relative best, either relative to your body weight or relative to an opponent. So it's all about making educated and calculated decisions based on, I guess, how much performance decrement you're willing to suffer in order to gain that competitive advantage. And like you said, if you're really affecting your performance because of the weight cut, maybe the performance decrements aren't outweighed by the competitive advantage. Whereas, you know, if you're cutting just enough weight to drop into the weight class below, but you're maintaining strength, then obviously the benefit outweighs the risk there.
Absolutely, and that's kind of the knowledge we try to impart on powerlifters, especially on novices and intermediates. You know, if you don't stand to either place higher, or as in actually place and finish with a medal, or to set some sort of record, then you really shouldn't be cutting for the competition that's in conversation. You should be pretty much just trying to walk in at your weight and perform at your best. Talking more nitty-gritty, how would you say that a weight cut actually works? What's actually going on when someone's going through this process? I know there's a few different ways they can kind of chip away at it.
Yeah, so I'll be happy to answer that question. I might just rewind a tiny bit and put it all in context, because I think it's important to, I guess, clarify some definitions. So you and I probably understand what we're talking about when we say weight cutting, but there is some confusion. So I like to term it more in terms of chronic weight loss versus acute weight loss. So when we're talking weight cutting, what I'm thinking about and what you're thinking about is the acute weight loss, okay? And this is like, I guess, temporary weight loss. So as opposed to chronic or longer term weight loss, where we're reducing body fat and maybe even reducing lean body mass, so muscle, what we're talking about is the weight that we can manipulate in the short term. And in a really simple sense, the way to think about it is long-term weight loss is, or even weight gain, is going to be muscle and body fat. Short-term weight loss is going to be body water and gut content. So we can delve a bit deeper into that, but yeah, that's sort of a global view of the different, I guess, components of the body that we're manipulating short-term versus long-term.
And I think another thing that's important to note is a term that you bring up in your study is that it's acute weight loss. So it's meant to be short-term. You know, it's not like we're dropping water and it's staying off forever. It's a short-term manipulation, right?
Yeah, 100% correct. I mean, and this is where education comes into it, because I think most, I'm talking about combat sport athletes here, most athletes understand that when you're dehydrated, you weigh less. But it's important to understand that we can manipulate this very quickly. I'm talking hours, if not 1 day, 2 days max. I've worked with boxers, generally juniors, that have received poor education, and these kids are afraid to drink water 8 weeks out from a competition because they know their weight's going to go up. And, you know, 8 weeks out from a competition in a sport when you're getting punched in the head every day, it's probably not the thing to be doing. So educating athletes about, you know, the time frames around these things is very important.
You hear that? Powerlifters out there, start tapering your water 8 weeks out.
and Reid, speaking of time frames, what's the furthest out from a competition, let's say, for powerlifting or, you know, any sport really, that we should be worried about initiating acute weight loss manipulations?
Okay, so acute weight loss, just touching on what I mentioned before, we're talking about gut content and body water. So one component of body water, although some people may say this is lean body mass, is the water that's bound to carbohydrate in the form of glycogen in the muscle. So we can definitely manipulate glycogen in a period of hours to days, but depending on your habitual training and your current diet, you know, we may want to extend carbohydrate manipulation out to 7 days, 10 days, something like this, if you're not training hard, which a lot of people are not leading up to a competition. So if you're tapering your training and maybe, you know, you've reduced the volume, you're not doing highly glycolytic work, you may need to increase a period of decreased carbohydrates for longer. But if you are training right up to your meet, like for instance, some of the fighters that I work with, they may still be doing 2 sessions a day in the week before a competition. So if we if carbohydrate manipulation was one tactic that we were using, we may only cut carbohydrates 3 or 4 days out. Whereas someone who's tapering over 2 weeks and not doing a whole lot of exercise, maybe we'll do 7 or 10 days just to make sure. But apart from that, so if we eliminate glycogen from the equation in terms of gut content manipulation, there we're talking about manipulating your dietary fiber intake, and there's some other strategies we can get into. But 3 days, maybe 3.5 days to completely empty your bowels if you're not using laxatives. And then in terms of actual dehydration, so I wouldn't restrict fluid for any more than 1 day, maybe a day and a half, so maybe 36 hours. And then in terms of active dehydration, so we're talking sauna, extra exercise, things like this, when we're actually pushing water out the body, I would advise athletes to do this as near to weigh-in as possible.
Mm. And maybe just for some of us who are a little bit more interested in that, in terms of the actual physiology that's going on during the water cut, like what kinds of things are happening within the body that are making these changes when you're, say, like loading water and peeing a ton more? Like what's actually, just for, if people are interested in that sort of thing, just kind of give us a light physiology on that, if you could.
Yes, so that's quite a fascinating area. So you're talking about the technique of water loading, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think with powerlifting and weightlifting and bodybuilding, water loading, it's very common. With the wider weight category sport populations, it's not so common. So this whole process of water loading, it's not even universally accepted that it works. In fact, the final study of my PhD, we conducted an intervention study where we had a completely controlled environment, and we had 2 groups, one group not water load and one group water load. And we actually found that it did work. So that was, it was actually surprising to me. I thought I was going to prove that it didn't work. But there seemed to be some variation between individuals. But in terms of a mechanism of how it works, so we're still not 100% sure, but we can draw some conclusions from studies in rats. So what we've found in people is that you can manipulate renal hormones, specifically a hormone known as vasopressin, otherwise known as antidiuretic hormone. So when this hormone is high, your body conserves water. Okay, so when you haven't drunk much water for a few days, this hormone's very high and it stops you urinating. Conversely, when you drink a lot of water, you suppress this hormone and your body lets go of more urine. So a lot of people and a lot of the bro science, if you read the articles online, they suggest that by increasing fluid intake for several days, you suppress this hormone, and then the hormone stays suppressed when you cut the water out and you keep going to the toilet. However, we actually measured hormones in people twice a day doing this water loading, and we actually found the opposite. So what actually happened was, although this hormone was suppressed, as soon as you reintroduce water, it actually rebounds in the other direction. And so it's quite a mystery as to how it would work. What we have shown, or scientists have shown in rodent models, is that there's these protein channels within the kidneys called Aquaporin Channels. And so these Aquaporin Channels, they promote fluid reabsorption in the kidneys, in the collecting ducts in the kidneys. And so they are in part regulated by this hormone vasopressin, or antidiuretic hormone. So when antidiuretic hormone is low, no, sorry, I'm confusing myself here. When antidiuretic hormone is high, there is more of these aquaporin channels, which means that more water is reabsorbed back into the body. Now, like I said, that this vasopressin hormone quickly rebounds back in the opposite direction. However, these aquaporin channels, they can stay up or down regulated for several days following these changes in the hormones. No one's shown this in humans. They've shown it in rat models, and given the fact that we can see the hormone changes in people, and the study that we conducted at the Institute of Sport in Australia showed that there is some effective water loading. We can hypothesize that the same thing that's happening in the rats is happening in people, because we do know that these aquaporin channels exist in humans. However, we haven't shown the degree that we can manipulate them in humans specifically. But there's no reason to suggest why this isn't the case. So if I was placing my money on it, I would say that's how it works. So that's a very convoluted answer, but there you go.
So,
no,
so really, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's magic, and you guys don't really understand it.
That's correct.
No, okay, no, that's actually an interesting explanation. It's kind of funny that antidiuretic hormone spikes, yet our excretion increases.
I don't know. Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's why it is confusing.
It's not a relationship that you would necessarily make sense of logically.
Well, yeah, because normally when antidiuretic hormone is high, you're conserving water. But like we said, those aquaporin channels can stay up and down regulated for several days following the hormone changes.
Definitely.
In your research, what are the time periods that people usually use a water loading type protocol?
Yeah, so in the study that we did, we just came up with a protocol. So we read a bunch of different articles online. We spoke to various people, and we decided on a 3-day water load. So we did a 3-day water load, 1 day of fluid restriction, so down to about 1 litre of water, and then about half a day of complete fluid restriction. Although we're working with ethics committees and things, and we don't want to put people in danger, so we were probably somewhat conservative with the protocol that we use. But I know that athletes I've spoke to, maybe do anywhere from 3 to 5 days of fluid loading, and then potentially 2 days of complete fluid restriction. But from the reading that I've done and the people I've spoken to that are experts in this renal physiology, it would seem that, I mean, there's probably a point where this is no longer true, but it would seem that the longer you extend a fluid load out and the more water you drink, probably the greater impact you have on these aquaporin channels. Now, don't everyone go out and drink 30 litres of water a day because you'll kill yourself. Don't say that I told you to do that. But that's what I think the evidence and research suggests.
There was some practical limit mentioned in the study with regards to avoiding hyponatremia and keeping yourself from dying due to low sodium. Do you remember offhand what that number was? There's something like 20 liters a day?
Yeah, sure it's going to vary on body size and sodium intake and all this sort of stuff, but I think 16 liters per day is the average kidney has the capacity to filter through, but a big part of it has got to do with the time frame. So what we found in our study is that the larger athletes were consuming 10 liters of fluid across the whole day, and they were completely fine. Their blood sodium did not leave reference range. However, if you were to drink 10 liters in 3 hours, I think you would be in trouble.
Most definitely. So, and actually, this is an interesting segue into, we generally, as let's say a rule of thumb, have people basically double their standard water intake as the top end of their water load. Is there some sort of more practical guideline that we should be following? Like maybe is there like a hard number relative to body weight, or would you say doubling their standard intake is a good place to start?
Well, it depends on what the standard intake is, but the values that we used in our study was 100 mil per kilogram. So 100 kilogram athlete, 10 liters. And we didn't pluck that number out of thin air, but we wanted to make it like a high number, but also have it relative to body weight and not too excessive that would kill anyone. We thought that that's probably double what a normal person would drink. So that's where we come up with that number.
Definitely don't want to kill anyone. So talking about how much weight people can actually cut, and I think this is one place where a lot of people make mistakes. Weight cuts aren't necessarily about how much weight you can cut, right? So I could realistically weigh in 15 pounds lighter 12 hours from now than I am right now if I really wanted to get it done. But it's not about that. It's about how much I can effectively put back on and maintain adequate, or not adequate, but appropriate hydration post weigh-in and be ready to actually perform at that level. So this is somewhere where we can actually differentiate between the 2-hour and the 24-hour weigh-in, because I think there's different practical applications for both of those. Obviously, you can take a much more temperate approach to rehydration when you have 24 hours between stepping on the scale and between stepping on the platform. So how would you say that we should treat things differently between the rehydration, or for the rehydration process, between a 2-hour and a 24-hour competition weigh-in?
Sure. So there was a lot there. I think right at the start of that, your question was, how does the amount of weight that you can lose differ? So maybe I'll touch on that and then get into the rehydration side of it. So
absolutely.
As general rules with the athletes that I work with, and these sound like very round numbers, but it's actually in line with a lot of the research and what I think are adequate. I would say for a 24-hour weigh-in, someone who's dedicated to this, and maybe not on their first cut, but definitely once you've got your head around how to do these things, I would say 24-hour weigh-in, 10% of your body weight is not unreasonable, and you'll be able to recover from that. So I think 10% for a 24-hour weigh-in, and I would say 5% for a day of weigh-in. Now we get into the issue of, like you said, it's all about how much weight can you put on. And I'll caveat that with, it's not just how much weight can you put on, but it's how much of the decrements can you reverse. So you have to be smart with how you're manipulating this weight. So as we touched on earlier, one of the parts or one of the body components of acute weight loss that is often overlooked is gut contents. So if you are removing undigested food or plant matter or fiber and fluid from your gut, okay, that's weight that we don't need to put back on. Having a kilogram of fiber sitting in your stomach is not going to help you lift anymore. So the athletes that I work with, probably one of the most misunderstood areas of this is how much weight you can actually lose from manipulating gut content, and how much this is just free weight loss. So, if you normally have a high fiber diet, I'm talking, 30, 40 grams of fiber a day. In my experience, athletes that I've worked with and myself personally, I think you can lose 1.5, 2% of your body mass through completely emptying your stomach. And so that's, 1.5, 2% of your body mass that you can get rid of that doesn't need to be put back in. So then if we add the dehydration on top of that, so when it comes to dehydration, the amount of dehydration will determine the performance decrements. And it's very predictable. So things like heat tolerance and aerobic capacity are the first to go. And these tend to go around 2% body mass loss. And so for a powerlifter, aerobic performance and heat tolerance when you're doing a lift is probably not a big deal. So you can at least do 2% body mass. And we're talking 2% body mass that you didn't recover from. So now we get into the issue of this 2% would be if you want to maintain performance as much as possible, you don't want to be more than 2% dehydrated at the time that you lift. Now, given that we've got a 2-hour weigh-in and we could rehydrate, even if we be very conservative, even if we say you can rehydrate 1% of your body mass in 2 hours, when in reality you could probably do a bit more than that. So that means that we could at least dehydrate ourselves 3%, recover that 1%, and be back to that golden 2% value there. In reality, that 2%, it's a bit different for everyone. So that they normally say 2 to 3% is when aerobic performance starts to be affected. And then more anaerobic performance is affected around that 3 to 4%. And then 1RM strength doesn't tend to go until sort of 4 to 5%. So really, I mean, if you really want to push this stuff and it's still completely safe, you could easily do, you could do 5 or 6% body mass. Don't worry about replacing the gut content. Recover as much fluid as you could and still step on the platform 3% lighter than what you were and still have completely the same performance as you would otherwise. And I'll just touch on, I don't know if somebody wants to jump in now before maybe I get into some of the specifics of the gut content manipulation. But yeah, I think if you do it smart, you'd be surprised at how much you can lose and still perform. But if you're doing it purely in dehydration, and also dehydration from sitting in a sauna, then the number becomes a lot lower that I would be willing to say that an athlete can lose and still perform.
So adding on top of that, if you had to resort to those kind of tactics, what kind of, is there a reasonable number that you could think of in terms of the performance loss from that kind of stuff? If somebody has to use those kind of tactics, what kind of, what could they do to alter their plan so that they won't miss lifts? If they can expect, 2, 3, 4% performance loss, if there is, I know that's a hard question, but if there is that kind of number out there, what would that be like for someone?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's a good question. And to be honest, I don't know with the strength performance. I think with the aerobic stuff, don't quote me on this, but I think with the aerobic capacity, they do have numbers for how much your VO2 max sort of decreases and heat tolerance and all this sort of stuff. But I'm not aware of any numbers in terms of strength. Like if you're saying you'll drop 5% of your bench press or whatever, I don't know if those numbers exist. I think my thoughts would be that would be individual. And also a big component of this is psychological. So physiology says one thing, but if it's the first time somebody's even cut 5% body weight versus the 10th time someone's cut 7 or 8% body weight, I'd probably put my money on the guy that's cutting more but is familiar with it.
Absolutely.
And in any case, it's hard to create, let's say, a hard rule for how to change those plans. The fact of the matter is, if you don't feel that you're at your maximum performance, just adjust your expectations and reduce your plan. That's the same kind of path we try to follow when we're selecting attempts for anybody in powerlifting. Oh, that felt heavy. Just do a little less than you planned on the next attempt. So to look at kind of what you said so far, Reid, in terms of steps we should follow, it seems like even before considering the water loading, that you would prioritize reducing food in the gut and essentially getting that fibrous matter, let's say, out of your GI tract as kind of a tier 1 option for how to reduce body weight if someone just had like 2 pounds to lose, for example, on a 200-pound male.
For sure, yep, 100%. That is the first stop of acute weight loss is manage your gut content. And the way I often explain it to athletes is, when you think about it, right, if you were to weigh yourself every half an hour throughout the day, right, your weight's going to go up and down all day long. And people understand that this isn't real weight, okay? Because if I have a large salad for lunch, plus I drink, a liter of fluid with that salad, and then I step on the scale straight away afterwards, I might be, depends on how much you eat, but it might be 1.5, 2 kilograms heavier. We know that's not real weight. Then I go to the toilet, and then maybe I'm 2 kilos lighter. So, we start to think that our weight fluctuates all day anyway, depending on the fluid that we've ingested, whether we've gone to the toilet recently, how big the meal is. And when it comes to this acute weight loss and food in your gut, we're talking food weight, and we're also talking fiber. Often people think about calories, and calories are definitely important for chronic weight loss. But in terms of how much you're going to weigh immediately after a meal, calories are irrelevant. So you could eat, and I've seen guys do this. So like some of the judo athletes I've worked with, the 2 or 3 days before weigh-in, they're living off chocolate. All they eat is chocolate, but they're eating 200 grams of chocolate a day. So they're getting, 2,000 calories. So they're getting plenty of energy, or, that's not plenty, but it's better than eating nothing. But they're getting sufficient energy, but the leftover residue in the stomach is very low. So in terms of what to actually do, I would say, if you really want to maximize this, go 3 days of as little fiber as possible. Okay, so like normally particularly if you're talking about manipulating body fat, we're talking like low calorie, high fiber, high volume sort of foods, so vegetables, salads, fruits, things like this. But then it completely flips on its head in the 2 to 3 days before weigh-in, and we're talking high energy but low weight and low fiber. Okay, so what a lot of it can be, if you're not manipulating carbohydrate and you're keeping carbohydrate intake stable, if normally your meals consist of, say, a palm-sized piece of lean protein, 2 to 3 cups of vegetables and a cup of rice, something like this, you just take the vegetables out of the equation, take the salad out of the equation, just have the carbohydrate and the protein. You've significantly reduced the fiber content of the meal, also the weight of the meal, but you're still getting the protein and carbohydrate. Where else do I want to go with that? And then with your carbohydrates, selecting the low fiber versions of them. So normally we're telling athletes, whole grain pastas, whole grain breads, cereals, things like this. But for the days before weigh-in, I'm not sure what cereals you guys have here, but I think like Captain Crunch and stuff. But in Australia, it was rice bubbles and cornflakes and these really low fiber alternatives. And it's funny because it's like all of a sudden, you're telling athletes to eat all these foods that they thought they weren't supposed to eat. And it's hard for a lot of people to get their head around. Like normally they're trying to eat nutrient-dense, high fiber, high volume foods, and now we're flipping it on its head. And I think 3 days will get you the maximum benefit there. The other option is to use I was just going to interrupt you for 1 sec there, Reid. This is actually a fun note because this is something I had mentioned to another coach while we were at World Championships this year. Someone was kind of putting together a last-minute weight cut, and they were 2 days out from their competition. There was no time to load water, and we were trying to figure out what to do, and this is something that one of our other coaches practices, and he picked it up from another coach, and we have friends who follow this process as well, and they transition their carbohydrate intake from, and for your reference, the way we structure most of the diets that we're giving people is based on macronutrient intake. So essentially within the context of some macronutrient guidelines, they consume, let's say, 250 carbohydrates per day. And, that can be in the form of
traditionally healthy carbohydrates, or maybe something that's traditionally considered a little less healthy. But essentially transitioning that from, let's say, fibrous vegetables and starchy carbohydrates into something simple, like simple sugars in the form of sweet candies in the last, let's say, 24 hours before weigh-in. And I think this is kind of a parallel to what you were saying with the chocolate. That's actually kind of, it sounds to me like it's not a completely impractical way to do things, because it is going to directly reduce that fiber and directly reduce that weight in the gut.
It's the perfect way to do it.
Okay, that's a fun answer, actually. I like the word perfect. Carry on, as you were.
And here's another thing. So it's like, I'll just give you an example. So some of the MMA athletes that I've worked with, and these guys, they really love to cut weight. And so some of the diets that I've done up for these guys, and with a 24-hour weigh-in, where you've got ample opportunity to replace everything that you've taken out. And then we're talking about completely stripping carbohydrate from the diet as well. So what a lot of these guys will have for the last 3 days, all they're eating is protein bars and peanut butter. So it's just like, it's high energy, high fat, low carbohydrate. You're still getting your, 3 or 4 serves of protein a day. But really you've consumed, if you have 3 protein bars plus a few tablespoons of peanut butter, maybe you can get 2,000 calories and 120 grams of protein in maybe 200 grams of food, 250 grams of food. Whereas I don't know about you, but I'm normally eating 2 kilograms of food per day once you add in the salad and the vegetables.
Most definitely. And actually, yeah, that's another point. You could reduce food mass yet further by switching to something like a protein powder as opposed to a lean protein source in the form of chicken or something like that.
Yeah, correct. And even thinking about your cooking technique. So like if you're going to have some eggs, frying the eggs just gets that water out of it, So it's like a fried egg is going to weigh less than a boiled egg and things like this. You can really go, you can really nerd out on this and play around with it. It's quite fun.
I'm sure Bryce is happy to hear that. He's a real big fried eggs fan.
and even with the meats, like now's the time to leave the fat on your steak, so you get more energy for a smaller weight. You get to enjoy your food a little bit more, and just I'll just add in that as well. It depends the athletes you work with. Like me myself, I like to eat a high fiber diet and a lot of vegetables and salads and things. So for me, 3 days of low residue feels like torture. But for some of the athletes that I work with, where you're forcing them to eat vegetables and salads, when you tell them you're going to eat candy for 3 days, they can't wait for it. So it's interesting how it plays into the psychology.
Reid, quickly, I wanted to bring you back to specifically strength-based athletes. You were talking about some of the manipulations to performance in the sense of aerobic capacity, but you mentioned that it would have to be a little bit more weight loss to start affecting strength performance. What are the mechanisms of action by which strength performance is affected? Is it still just dehydration, or are there hormonal changes going on, or what's
I don't believe it's hormonal. I've outlined all this in the reviews, and to be honest, don't quote me on this. I believe it's got to do with when electrolyte imbalances can then start to affect neural mechanisms and things around this. But yeah, to be honest, I can't remember the exact underlying physiology of exactly what's going on with the strength. But definitely, and that's why it takes longer, because it's, as we know, strength is more neural rather than metabolic. So it's like the metabolic processes go first, but then the neural stuff tends to go a bit later. And I do believe it's due to do with electrolyte imbalances and things like that. I think some studies have shown, once potassium starts to decrease within the cells, that's sort of correlates with strength decreases as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually brings up a question that I had. So let's say, beyond gut manipulations, let's say we have an athlete that's water loading, and a lot of people tend to not get a ton of potassium in their diet anyway, and as they're loading water and peeing a lot more, they're at least in theory peeing out a lot of the electrolytes that they're taking in. What is there anything that we could add into the diet during the week that they're water loading? Like, would adding in extra electrolytes during that time period have any effect on, deterring any performance loss from that kind of a manipulation?
Yeah, we probably need more research in that area, but if this is my take on it, and definitely with the majority of electrolytes, like, if you're trying to dehydrate yourself, which is what you're doing when you're removing water, if you're adding more electrolytes into the system, you're going to hold on to more water. So it's sort of like people wanting to have their cake and eat it too. If you're trying to dehydrate yourself but stay hydrated, it sort of doesn't work. And so that's when the recognizing the time frame available for recovery is very important. So what the idea is, you're trying, and you know, if we're really trying to get rid of water, we're trying to decrease the sodium pool in the body as well. So you're doing a low sodium diet concurrent to these fluid manipulation practices. So you're trying to get rid of sodium, get rid of some electrolytes, get rid of water, step on the scales, and then put all that stuff straight back in. So that's like sports drinks.
I guess I should have been a little bit more clear. I was referencing like specifically like if there's low potassium in the diet, for example, you tend to hold on to a little bit more water. Would adding the potassium in not only deter the performance degradation, would it not only decrease the issues with performance, but would it also help like prevent any retention of water from having not enough potassium?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if your body is holding on to water because there's not enough potassium, then if you make this adequate, it will have that effect. But I'm not sure if that's the actual mechanism, or that that's a consequence of low potassium making you hold on to water. Definitely, if there's less potassium in the cell and more sodium outside the cell, you're going to hold on to preferentially extracellular fluid. So if you're saying, you know, increase the potassium to make sure the fluid itself does stay within the cell, that could be something. But again, if we're trying to lower body weight, we're trying to get rid of water, like end of story. I'm thinking about the total body water pool, not necessarily where the water is. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll look into that. So
it's just an idea that a couple of coaches have passed around, and I thought, you know, with you being on, it would be a good time to ask.
Yeah. My understanding as well is that the body does quite a good job of regulating potassium. So I think dietary changes don't tend to affect the cellular potassium pool without withstanding extreme situations. But yeah, I'll definitely have to do some more reading and get back to you on that.
Okay, appreciate it.
Reid, I'd like to back up for a second. In powerlifting, we just kind of assume that a water load is a superior practice, and reading a review kind of brought back to mind the fact that it's just one avenue of weight manipulation among many. Has your research shown less detrimental methods for overall performance? And, you know, is it just a bias coming from powerlifting and coming from the fact that water loading is such a common manipulation that I feel it's superior, or, you know, is there anything to actually back that up?
Yeah, I don't see any reason why it is superior. I think, like you just alluded to, that it's just another tool in the tool belt. Definitely, research has shown that active dehydration, so we're talking about sweat losses as a consequence of exercise, tends to be affect performance to a lesser degree than passive sweating methods. So if you just go for a jog or perform your normal workout and sweat coming from that, your body tends to hold on to the fluid where it needs it and let go of the more extracellular fluid, versus if you're sitting in a sauna, your body just gets rid of the fluid sort of from all compartments. So definitely sweating as a consequence of exercise is preferred. And then the other thing is just fluid restriction is a preferred way to do it as well. So if you just don't drink water for a day, there's going to be less impact on performance than if you push that water out. And the other benefit, and the other benefit to that is that if you are getting rid of fluid by just not drinking it, okay, so it's coming from respiration, it's coming from perspiration and urination, you're not getting rid of as much electrolytes. So when it does come time to rehydrate, you could effectively do it with straight water, because you've already got the electrolytes on board and you're just adding water back into the system, versus if you're sweating a lot and you're getting rid of a lot of sodium and even some potassium, then you really need to make sure to replace the electrolytes. So the first step is, and again, it depends on the athlete, because some people hate to restrict fluid, even if it's for one day. So like doing some sort of training the day before your comp, and then not replacing the fluid is an effective way. So again, for the athletes that I work with, maybe they just do some, if you're a boxer, maybe you do some shadow sparring the night before weigh-in, with some extra layers on to promote some sweat loss there. But definitely, if you can tolerate psychologically a fluid restriction, just not drinking the fluid for a day, or even decreasing the fluid for a day, is going to be the best way to do it.
So to bring back, let's say, the tiers of how we should approach these things, the first you said was changing the amount of fiber or food in the gut. Simple. Second from that being a water load with preferentially a cessation or a reduction of water towards the end of it. Third being active dehydration in the form of exercise, and the fourth being passive dehydration in the form of heat.
Correct. Yep. That sounds very good. I would just the comment that I would offer there, and again, this is interesting because, like you said, the bias coming from powerlifting. I would only put the water loading in there if you absolutely have to. The athletes that I work with, I don't recommend water loading unless we can't get it through all those other means. But again, I don't know whether the water loading, because we haven't done those studies to know where the fluid is coming from with the water loading. But I would definitely say gut content manipulation, fluid restriction, and then maybe water loading / active dehydration, and then the passive dehydration, heat stress on the end there. If you're talking about 24-hour weigh-in, there's no reason why you can't restrict carbohydrates, because you've got plenty of time to put it back in. And even with a day of weigh-in, providing you're not completely depleting yourself, a lower carbohydrate diet, so not a no carbohydrate diet, but just a lower carbohydrate diet to get rid of a little bit of glycogen, I can't see how that would impact powerlifting performance either.
Actually, where would sodium reduction fall on that list?
Yeah, so I would say sodium reduction is just sort of in line with the fluid restriction. So if you just decrease the amount of sodium in your diet, you should, in theory, let go of some fluid. But again, there's no studies to really show that in healthy individuals, that if you manipulate sodium intake, or at least decrease sodium intake, that you decrease body water. Definitely in people with high blood pressure, we know that decreasing sodium intake will reduce blood pressure, but by reducing the fluid in the circulation. So we assume that the same thing is going to happen in healthy individuals. But I'm yet to read a study that has shown that we get a group of healthy individuals, we decrease sodium intake and we decrease body water. But I still use it with the athletes that I work with.
Well, Reid, let me just ask you, it seems to be the case that after high sodium meals or days, people seem to gain weight. So it stands to reason that the opposite might be true.
Yeah, it does. But again, that's it all depends where you're coming from as well. So if you are, if you sweat from exercise and you're getting rid of sodium there, so then you want to add sodium into the drinks to get you back to baseline in terms of sodium and fluid balance. Now, if you have more sodium with the fluid that you consume, you will hold on to that fluid better until your body sorts out the sodium balance. But we've got very complicated renal mechanisms that regulate sodium and fluid balance. And your body in a healthy individual always wants to get everything back to normal. So given sufficient time, your body will just pass that extra sodium and the extra fluid along with it. But again, that's a good point that you bring up, because we are talking about acute weight loss. And that's why it stands to reason that, if we did 3 or 4 days of a low sodium intake, perhaps we're going to let rid of more fluid, let go of more fluid, particularly if you are sweating. Okay, so it's again, if you're getting rid of water and you're also taking in less sodium, then the water that you do take in isn't going to be retained as much. So yeah, again, it seems that should be the case. I believe it is the case, and I do it with the athletes that I work with. But yeah, we don't have the actual study to say that you'll lose X amount of weight from reducing sodium this much.
So if someone has an extra, let's say 1 or 2 pounds that they need to, or I'll use the metric units that you foreigners probably understand. Let's say they have a half or a kilo to lose. So throwing on a couple layers of sweatpants and, a couple shirts and a hoodie and walking on a treadmill at a moderate pace, let's say the day before competition, is likely to have a lesser effect than using heat to dehydrate the morning of.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's actually good to know. That's not something that I would have defaulted to have someone doing, because powerlifters in particular tend to be, they're very ritualistic and huge creatures of habit, and mostly crotchety old people. And so, not really, but for the most part, the idea of introducing additional exercise during a time of reduced demand and particularly something to which they are not specifically adapted. So in the case of a boxer, they train so that they could box nonstop for 2 hours, whereas we train so we can do 9 single effort lifts or 9 maximum effort single lifts. And so the idea of introducing something that's of cardiovascular demand is out of the norm of what we would ask from them. And so the idea of that is like, people would be generally hesitant for that.
Yeah, well, actually, I should clear up there. Like physiologically, it will be better. But like you said, you definitely don't want to be introducing extra exercise. Like now we're talking about training and tapering and everything. And definitely doing foreign exercise is not the way to do it either. So I would say if there's an existing training session, you can take advantage of that by maybe some extra layers and turning the heat up, probably not even turning the heat up, but just like getting rid of some extra fluid in an existing training session. Because even with the combat sport athletes, you don't want to put a boxer on a rowing machine in order to drop some extra fluid if you don't have to. And again, it's all about pros and cons. And if your athlete prefers a light sauna or a bath, then that could be a better way to do it. And particularly given the fact that you do have a recovery period. So it is a pertinent point that you brought up. There is certainly an individual component to all this.
I don't think we have anyone who is too fat to walk on a treadmill. I think we can all. I think as human beings, we are all specifically adapted to walk for short periods of time, and I could be mistaken in that. But
just put some Netflix on and you're ready to go.
Yeah, just spend 20-30 minutes walking at a moderate pace. Nobody needs to, you definitely do want to break a sweat. I almost said you don't want to break a sweat there, but you definitely want to break a sweat. But the idea is that you don't, this doesn't need to be a cardiovascular incident. It's just you were trying to get your heart rate moving a little bit above the norm. So actually, I want to flip the switch right now. So let's assume we've made weight, and we're post weigh-in and we compete in 2 hours. So where do we go from here? How do we maximize our ability to rehydrate effectively?
Okay, so what we need to do, so in an ideal world, if you had longer, what you do is you consume at least 150% of whatever you lost. So if you lost 2 pounds, you drink 3 pounds. I don't know if it works in imperial. In liters and kilos are the same, right? So if you lose 1 liter, if you lose 1 kilogram, you drink 1.5 liters. What we have to do now is weigh this up against the need to be ready to compete and gut comfort and things like this. So if you have dropped 3 kilograms, okay, and so in an ideal world you need to drink 4.5 liters, but you've only got 2 hours to do it. That's not practical. So it's all about weighing up again the pros and cons. And when you've got a short recovery period post-weigh-in, we're trying to balance the need to recover optimally versus the need to prepare ourselves mentally, physiologically, and nutritionally for the competition ahead. So that's why not aiming for as larger weight losses with reduced recovery time frames is particularly important as well. So we want to drink 150% the losses if possible. Ways that we can speed this up, okay, is some people would say like drink slow and frequently and like this, and it's actually not the way to do it, not in the beginning at least anyway. You want to get a good bolus of fluid in your stomach, okay, to increase that gastric emptying, and it almost like increases the pressure in the stomach. So you can drink about 700 ml. I don't know what that is in fluid ounces, but like 3/4 of a liter, you can drink that straight off the bat to fill your stomach up, and then do slow and frequent after that. If you drink slow and frequent from the beginning, you're slowly trickling it in. What you want to do is to get your stomach almost full, so it starts to push all the fluid down. And again, it doesn't matter if you're slightly uncomfortable in the beginning. I'm not talking about drinking 2 liters of water straight up, but getting a good bolus of fluid in your stomach to start that gastric emptying happening. And again, it doesn't matter if you're slightly uncomfortable in the beginning because you've still got 2 hours until competition. So getting a good bolus of fluid, having some extra electrolytes in that, and even some carbohydrate in the form of sugar helps it all absorb faster or more completely in the intestine, and helps the body retain that fluid. So things like sports drinks are fantastic. So Gatorade, Powerade, whatever, are good. But then they tend to not be as salty or contain as much sodium as your body would like to hold on to that fluid better. So even things like, I'm not sure what the brands you have in the States, but like Gastrolite, Pedialyte, Hydrolyte, things like this. Gatorade do one called Gatorlyte, but they're like a higher sodium content beverage, and they're often used for recovery from diarrhea and conditions like this. So so essentially what you want is fluid, sodium, and sugar, so carbohydrate. And so that's why sports drinks are fantastic. But you can do this in any number of ways. So in theory, you can just have plain water as long as you have some sort of sodium and carbohydrate along with it. So even salty snacks and some sugary snacks. So maybe you want to have like pretzels and candy and some fluid to help your body hold on to that fluid.
Reid, speaking of sodium, how much with that is too much? Because it seems in recent times we've actually seen like a huge spike in people using a ton of sodium on game day. If you look on Instagram, you might see somebody chugging like a whole thing of soy sauce, or just absolutely going to town on an entire bag of salty chips. Where would you say is the actual like optimum levels there? Like how do you know you're having a little bit too much?
As an aside, there's like an order of magnitude difference on the amount of sodium between a bottle of soy sauce and a bag of chips. Just to throw that in there. I think the soy sauce is the more ridiculous example.
Oh yeah. I was just trying to give different examples there.
Yeah, I think so generally it's a lot more than people would think. Okay, and this is why sports drinks are typically not salty enough when we're talking about recovery from extreme forms of dehydration, because food becomes, or fluids at least, become unpalatable once you reach the higher sodium levels. So again, things like Hydrolyte, Pedialyte, Gatorlytes, things like this, they are formulated to have the maximum amount of sodium to promote the optimal rehydration. And I believe it's around 90 millimole per litre. So it's quite high. I don't think you can really overdo it. Like if you're going to eat a bag of pretzels and put extra salt on it or whatever, I don't think there's a danger of having too much in terms of what's physiologically happening with the fluid retention. What I think is a problem is gut comfort and how an athlete feels. Although if you mix these sports drinks or these hydrolytes and things like this up at concentrations far higher than what it says on the label, you can have like a form of osmotic diarrhea, where instead of the fluid crossing the intestinal barrier and being absorbed into the body, fluid actually comes out from the body into the intestine, because where the electrolytes go, the fluid will go. So if it's too high, you can have this osmotic diarrhea, but that's not likely to happen with food. That would only be with these incredibly salty beverages, and when you're mixing them up far in excess of what the instructions would say. So I would say that the best bet is high sodium fluids, specifically designed for rehydration, mixed according to the manufacturer's directions. So the Hydrolyte, Pedialyte, Gastrolite, Gatorlyte, things like this, and then also have some carbohydrate-based snacks alongside it.
So skip the whole bottle of soy sauce then.
Skip the soy sauce. But if you wanted maybe some sushi rolls, like a California rolls, some white rice, and they've got some extra sugar in the rice, and you want to put some soy sauce on that, I think that's a good idea.
I think you're slowly becoming Bryce's favorite person. You've named like 2 of his favorite foods.
Well, Joe, I think one thing that he mentioned is that like the soy sauce is just as an extreme example, like it's not going to do harm because your body has a pretty good way of regulating its homeostasis when it comes to electrolyte balance. Just like protein intake, I guess, if you don't use it all, like you're just going to, absorb it in other ways or poop it out or something like that.
Right.
Reid, I wanted to ask you, what changes are not reversible in 2 hours for someone that cuts, let's say, 5% of their body weight?
What changes? So, I mean, the main thing is just the magnitude of the weight loss. You can only reverse so much dehydration in a short period of time. But in terms of, if we're talking carbohydrate intake, so even like, I would rather an athlete say max out the dehydration at maybe 4 or 5%, but body mass, and then we're going to recover 1 to 2%, bring us back to around that 3%. And then anything above the 5%, 4 to 5% dehydration, I would rather come from reduced carbohydrate intake, even with a 2-hour weigh-in period, because I think in a sport like powerlifting, the amount of carbohydrate you need to perform is actually quite low relative to, sports where you're completely depleting glycogen stores in a training session or a competition. So if you're running a marathon or playing a soccer game, you want to be carbohydrate loaded. But I think, particularly when we're talking about pros versus cons, if you are going to cut a large amount of body weight and you're going to be competitive at that lower weight division, I think carbohydrate manipulation is a good tactic rather than extreme levels of dehydration. So I would say like moderate dehydration and then throw the carbohydrate decreased carbohydrate intake on top of that. And even then, I think within 2 hours, I think that's plenty of time to get some carbohydrates back on board. Like again, if we're choosing sports drinks and sugary foods, and if you eat them straight away after weigh-in, easily within 2 hours, your blood sugars come back up again, and you've started to replace those glycogen stores. So I don't think there's if it's all moderate, I think 2 hours is plenty.
So what about after the actual weigh-in period? You've had all of the stuff that you've named, and you're going throughout the day. How can we keep performance high? Is there anything extra that we need to do just because of the adaptations that have happened in our body that we need to have in order to keep our performance up throughout the day? Is there anything in particular that's different just because we've gone through these manipulations?
I would just keep focusing on carbohydrate intake and fluid intake with some sodium alongside that to get the hydration back to where you want it. But I'm not 100% familiar with how powerlifting comps run, but definitely the issues are in combat sports is that if they've got constant matches or fights throughout the day, and you don't quite know when you're going to be competing, it can be quite nervous or nerve-wracking, and people sort of don't plan their meals like they normally would. So just making sure to keep at least grazing throughout the day, and generally going for lower fiber, lower fat, higher carbohydrate options that you can digest quickly, get some energy from, and that doesn't upset your stomach so much. So even again, grazing on candy throughout the day, low fiber, white bread sandwiches, maybe jam, things like that. Even some fruits, like a lot of athletes like, bananas, even tin fruits or fruits in Jell-O, things like this. Just light foods, high carbohydrate that don't sit heavy in your stomach. And then there's the other thing about, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with, but the research looking at mouth sensing, and so like carbohydrate mouth rinse and things like this. So we know that there is a particular benefit derived from carbohydrates being in the mouth and in the oral cavity, independent of the actual fuel associated with that carbohydrate. So even if you swish a sports drink around in your mouth and spit it out, there's some sort of neural mechanism going on that improves performance. This is very well established in endurance sports, and there's more and more research coming out to show that in more shorter duration, higher intensity sports, that this is the case as well. So I would say, even if you have not played around with carbohydrate intake at all, leading up to weigh-in, I would still definitely recommend something sweet and sugary in the moments before you lift. And it's almost like it's like a pick-me-up, it's almost like a hit of caffeine, but it's and the mechanism actually centers around the pleasure centers and reward centers in the brain. So definitely consuming some high GI carbohydrate as close to competition as possible to take advantage of that.
Reid, I interrupted you earlier when you started to talk about something that we ended up not covering, and this is back on the other side of the weigh-in prior to actually weighing in. You started to talk about laxatives, and I didn't give you the opportunity to finish, so I would actually like you to continue on that.
Yeah, so just with the laxatives, again, it's just manipulating gut content, and so there's nothing like it works for sure, and athletes have used this for years. When we talk about it might take 3 days of a low fiber diet to completely empty the bowels. If you take a bowel preparation formula, you can probably do this in an hour of sitting on the toilet. The disadvantage to that is you're probably going to feel like crap. So I would definitely not want the athletes that I work with using laxatives and bowel preparation formulas. I would rather them do it through fiber manipulation. The other thing is that you're going to get some form of dehydration and electrolyte losses alongside the bowel prep or the laxative. And again, it's not to say you can't recover from all this stuff, but it's throwing another spanner in the works that I don't know exactly how it's going to work, and it's probably going to be different for each individual. So that's how I explain the low fiber diet to people as well. I say, have you ever used a laxative? And if you speak to combat sport athletes, a lot of them have used laxatives before. So you say, how would you like to get a similar weight loss and still be able to eat food and not have to sit on the toilet for hours a day? And most people would prefer to manipulate fiber intake than to sit on the toilet and blast it out.
I like your use of blasted out there. That's poo puns.
Reid, are there any gender differences or age differences associated with manipulating body weight that you've encountered?
Yeah. I just from a practical or an applied standpoint. So again, it's like the research. I don't know of specific studies to back this up. But definitely, so the first thing is that at a given body mass, females will tend to have higher body fat, thus less muscle mass. And if, higher muscle mass means there's higher body water, because muscle is where the water is as opposed to body fat. In theory, females have less water to lose. So that's one issue of it, one factor of it there. But then you say, all right, if we do have an extremely lean female, say a female that's 15% body fat and a male that's 15% body fat, are they identical then because they've got the same amount of muscle mass? Potentially. So, I mean, maybe it's not necessarily a gender difference, but just a reflection of the different muscle mass. There is a issue that women tend to sweat less than men, so that's something else to consider. It may take longer to get the same results through sweating. And then, of course, there's the hormonal things, and we're talking menstrual cycle. And I'm really at a loss to come up with good guidelines around that. I've worked with a lot of female athletes, and depending on what time in their cycle it is, it can be quite difficult to predict the weight loss possible. With a lot of the combat sport athletes that are, chronically starving themselves, and I don't know whether I think in powerlifting it would be less because people are conscious of maximizing strength. But with a lot of these other weight category sports, when they're surviving off these chronic energy deficits, a lot of females stop menstruating. So like that removes that problem essentially. But yeah, that's the area that I'm unclear about how to best manage it. A lot of females will take various forms of birth control so that they can at least get some sort of control over that aspect. But in my mind, that's the key difference there is talking about the monthly cycles, females versus men.
And what about age differences?
Age differences, I think, is going to come down to again, it's like age will indirectly affect it, based on the fact that potentially, older people have less muscle mass and more body fat, so there's less water on board. I'm unaware of whether there's difference in sweating response with old people compared to young people. I guess it depends on how old we're talking. I would guess there probably is some difference. If we're talking like, 60-year-olds versus 20-year-olds, there probably would be some difference in sweat response, but I'm not actually sure. There was something else I wanted to mention there. Just on the sweat response, I thought, now's not the time, nobody asked this question, but just on the sweat response, you can actually teach your body to sweat more. So like if you're going to be using sweating as a tactic, doing some sweat sessions for, maybe 2 weeks leading up to the actual planned sweat session. So like when you're trying to sweat in order to reduce body mass, you're sweating and not replacing the fluid. But even doing some sweat sessions leading up to that where you do replace the fluid, but you just quote unquote teach your body how to sweat, can be effective. And the way that this works is because it's a form of heat acclimation. So one of the physiological changes that accompanies heat acclimation is that the body tends to sweat more and sweat earlier as a way to regulate body temperature. So if you do some even saunas or hot baths or other forms of heat acclimation or sweating for, I think, I'm not an expert on the heat acclimation, but I think it takes maybe half an hour a day for 2 weeks, something like that, is a way to it helps the body sweat easier. I guess is what I'm saying. And even some of the combat sport athletes will wear a sweatsuit, so like the garbage bag type things, but they've got more sophisticated ones like an actual sweatsuit. So wearing a sweatsuit at training in the weeks leading up to the actual sweat that you're going to do can make that final sweat a little bit easier.
That's really interesting.
For powerlifting.
Reid, I'm having a hard time accepting the fact that a 5% weight loss manipulation is completely reversible in 2 hours. And the reason is because my experience working with athletes tends to disagree with that. Just with the fact that for a 105 kilo athlete dropping, 5 kilos or so of body weight, you can weigh in 5 kilos lighter, and then completely reverse those and perform the exact same as if you didn't. And if that's true, it just kind of like, it sounds like everyone should manipulate their body weight, because you end up with a higher Wilks coefficient, regardless of whether you're close to the weight class or not.
Yeah. So my comment around that is that it depends where they're coming from and the way you're doing it. So again, I'm not interested in the athlete being 105 kilograms again. I'm interested in them reversing the physiological decrements that they've incurred. So if we're talking somebody's already consuming a high fiber diet, if we guys that size, you'd be surprised how much pardon my language, but how much shit is inside there. So it's like when they do the low fiber diet for 3 days, if we're talking close to 0 grams of fiber for 3 days, a 105 kilogram athlete who normally eats a lot of fiber, he might drop 2 kilograms right there. So that's 2 kilograms that doesn't need to be replaced. And then we're talking if he removes the another 3 kilograms of fluid, and then maybe even if he only replenishes half of that, I don't see why he's going to perform worse, particularly if he's experienced at this, because like we touched on earlier, strength doesn't seem to be affected until those greater degrees of dehydration. But I will say, nobody should try any of this stuff for the first time before an important competition. You should always practice all this stuff ahead of time.
I think Bryce,
you got the experts with the experience there, because to be honest, my experience working with lifters is limited. But I will tell you that the lifters that I have worked with, so weightlifters and things before big competitions, I don't know whether it's a placebo thing or it's the fact that it's a big comp, but they've all exceeded their expectations. Maybe they would have done that already, but as an example, I worked, when was the last Commonwealth Games? You guys don't even care about the Commonwealth Games, but the Commonwealth countries have the Commonwealth Games every 4 years. And so the last one was...
That's actually an IPF event.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
So at the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, I worked with a weightlifter there, and she was really struggling to make weight, and she set a PB, and also competed at a weight below what she thought that she would. I don't know whether the excitement of competing on the big stage helped her get the extra lift. But yeah, and we did the low fiber diet. We did a little bit of a sweat. She then replaced as much fluid as she could afterwards, and performed fine. But I mean, as with everything with sports science, it's a bit of an art based on a science. So I think you really have to work with your athletes, see what works with them, and definitely trial it ahead of time. And if you're obviously physiology is physiology, but if you're telling yourself it's going to be terrible, maybe it's going to be terrible. Versus if you practice it a few times ahead of time, and show yourself what you can actually achieve, I think is a much smarter way to do it.
To add on to that, Bryce, I think it's, we often think in percentages. There's, the number of people throw around, I believe, is 3% of body weight from water reduction is the amount that we look at as the point where you start to see a big uptick in terms of expected performance effects. And so I think in that we aren't accounting for the fact that you can lose, 2 to 2.5% of your body weight simply by emptying the weight in the gut and the weight that's in the bowels. And so when you factor that in, that just changes that 3% to about 5% and makes that a little more practical when you think about it, Bryce.
Well, and then also there are upper limits too. Like 120 kilo guy doesn't have that much more intestine or stomach space, right?
Yeah, correct. It does definitely, like the bigger athlete will hold on to more, but yeah, for sure the 160 kilogram, I don't know, giant from what's the show, Game of Thrones, probably doesn't have 5 kilograms of undigested fiber in his stomach, but it's probably a lot more than maybe any of us think.
That's probably because Thor only eats beef. There's no fiber in his diet.
Well, one of the other things I wanted to mention is that for powerlifters, unlike mixed martial arts or other martial arts sports, leverages play a pretty large role, and it tends to be the case that the body weight that you've been training at for months on end, your belt fits a certain way, your knee sleeves fit a certain way, you sit on the bench press a certain way, and weighing substantially different can possibly affect performance too. So it becomes important to compete at about the same body weight you train at.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely haven't been thinking about in this conversation. And it's definitely a very good point. I will say there's a similarity with particularly, not so much in wrestling, like I think the wrestlers get over it fine, but definitely in judo. So with judo, and particularly guys that are very good at judo, when they can make it look quite graceful, they say, like one of the analogies that I heard, a guy's saying he's driving around in a certain car every day at training, and then if he cuts too much weight when he competes, it's like he's now driving a smaller car and he's not used to the way the car handles. And so when he's trying to dance around the opponent and figure out all the levers, it's way off. So
it's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah, so it's definitely weighing up all these things and seeing what works for you.
Well, my eyes have been opened to a few things in this conversation so far.
Mine too.
Let's take it one step further here. Reid, would you say that there's any super common mistakes or maybe myths that are kind of come immediately to mind for you for things that, let's say, since you got into the field of being senior scientist at Gatorade Sports, or since you got into doing your Ph.D. work, is there anything that you were like, oh wow, that's just for lack of a better term, total bullshit?
Yeah, I think not in terms of total bullshit, but I think one of the biggest misunderstandings is people don't think about manipulating fiber intake. I think that's the biggest mistake that I see, and is that people don't understand what can be achieved there. And then on the back of that is that it's very hard for athletes to get their head around when calories count and when food weight counts, because it's like in 2 to 3 days. Again, like another way to explain it is how much fat can you lose in a week? And if you're already fairly lean and you're on the back of several weeks of an energy deficit because you're trying to drop fat, 1 pound per week would be amazing if you lost a pound of fat. So let's say that's half a kilogram. So half a kilogram in 1 week, best case scenario. That means you're losing less than 100 grams of fat per day. So doing a low calorie diet 3 days before weighing, you're accomplishing nothing. It's like, what are you going to lose? 30 grams versus, if you don't have that apple and the apple weighed 200 grams, that's 200 grams less food sitting in your stomach. So yeah, like I guess manipulating fiber intake and then just knowing when calories count and when the weight of food and fluid counts. And that just comes down to education. I think they're the biggest ones that I think athletes have a problem with.
Those are good answers, actually. I really like that. The whole idea of calories versus true physical weight of the food is something that a lot of people probably wouldn't even think about. I had a client recently who was preparing for a competition, and he was beneath his weight class, but he decided to have 0 sodium for the 2 days before the competition because he was concerned that his weight might spike up and he might be over, and without mentioning it to me, no less. And and he told me, he sent me a frantic email telling me he was cramping up the day before the meet, and I was like, what the hell are you doing? Why? There's no need to do this. All you need to do is take a practical approach, and had he done something simple like reduce the fiber in his diet, that would have required almost nothing from him and could have reduced his weight in a similar manner.
For sure. Yep. 100%.
And then as a last question here for you, Reid, I think we're pretty close to wrapping up. There's this, let's call it the powerlifting legend move for when you finish your weight cuts. And this is something that I know that Bryce has had a hard time wrapping his head around. It's which is a long list of stuff, but this is towards the top. And you know, the old wisdom says to eat a whole lemon at the end of your weight cut when you cease your water and food intake, and the idea being that it's a diuretic. And you know, this is something that I've heard before, right? You know, we've all heard that lemon is diuretic, which, you know, it probably is, but relative to what, right? And so would you say, in the case of consuming that, you know, however much the internal of a lemon weighs, well, maybe 50 grams, do you think there's enough of a diuretic effect from consuming that it would offset the weight of that actual food?
I mean, you brought this up before this conversation, before we started recording, but I've actually never heard of this practice before, and I'm amazed to hear it. It's a fantastic anecdote, and if it's widely practiced, that blows my mind. I cannot see any physiological reason why this would be the case, but I'm going to do a lot of reading after this to get my head around the powerlifting lemon myth. But it does highlight the fact that within all these sports, you know, there's so many cultural practices that go along for the ride, and they get handed down from coach to coach and training partner to training partner. And yeah, I can't give you a good answer for the lemon. I don't see why it would work. I don't think it does work, and I'm going to try and figure out where this come from after this conversation.
Actually, you know what? If you can find an answer to that, you know, a certain answer in one way or the other, or you can, you know, maybe do a study. This will be worthwhile. There's at least dozens of people eating lemons before their weigh-ins. Well, we have very medium stakes for powerlifting, you know, so it's people really want to work hard to get down to their weight classes. And, you know, I steal that expression from a funny movie preview. But yeah, I don't know if you guys have any other questions.
No, it's been enlightening, and honestly, I have a fair amount to think about in terms of what amount of weight loss can we actually expect, what amount can affect performance, and what are the preferred methods of getting there.
Yeah, it's completely opened my eyes to a lot of stuff, and I can't wait to get in the trenches and kind of play around with some of this stuff and see if it'll end up working out for our athletes.
Actually, I have one last question, Reid. Something that just came to mind. There's a diuretic effect associated with alcohol, right? And so what's your thoughts on that? And this is something I've thrown around, and I've never actually tried it or had anyone do it. But you know, I know a coach actually who was doing a weight cut, and he had a glass of wine the night before he weighed in. He had manipulated the fiber in his diet. He had reduced the food in his gut. He had reduced his sodium intake that final day after loading it up through the course of the week. And at the end of the day, he had a glass of wine, anticipating some sort of diuretic effect. And this isn't meant to be a criticism of him. I'm curious because I've always wondered, you know, like nights when I'll go out heavily drinking, I come back the next morning despite eating like an asshole and I'm lighter. And so I'm curious, is there some mechanism going on there that is, let's say, usable? Because, you know, something like, for example, a shot of vodka the night before you compete, it's probably not going to have an impact on your performance. And if it has the benefit, or that potential benefit of increasing your weight reduction, it might end up being a simple way to amplify that.
I think there's definitely something there. I don't know how usable it is, but I mean, for sure, alcohol has a diuretic effect. I don't know the quantities, like how much alcohol you need to consume to lose X amount of fluid. For sure, it has a diuretic effect. For sure, particularly if you're used to drinking, even if it's fairly infrequent, but even if you were to drink, you know, a glass of wine once a week, having a glass of wine is not going to affect your performance the next day. For some athletes, it may actually be a net positive, given the calming effect and the relaxation and all this sort of stuff. So I think there's something there. I'm not going to be using it with the athletes that I work with moving forward. But for sure, I mean, yeah, I'm sure you could, if you did the studies, you could probably figure out how much weight you lose and how strong the alcohol needs to be so that the fluid doesn't offset what you're going to lose.
Yeah.
I know myself, I rarely drink. And if I even have one beer, I won't feel right the next morning. So for me, that's not so good, but for other people, right, perhaps.
Well, Reid, what you need to do is you need to drink heavily for a few weeks leading up to it to acclimate, so that. Yeah. No, and Hani will get back to us with a test of drinking 100% pure ethanol, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it'll be my preparatory sweats, so to speak, in terms of alcohol intake.
But that's actually true. I remember one of my chemistry professors in like second year chemistry telling me about the enzyme in your liver is alcohol dehydrogenase, and when you stop drinking, your body stops producing this enzyme. So this guy told the class that if you're going to have a big New Year's Eve, you should have a few beers in the days leading up to New Year's Eve to warm up those enzymes and to get your body used to handling the alcohol.
That's peaking properly.
Oh man, I didn't know about this. I've had some nasty hangovers before that I could have prevented simply with a proper alcohol peaking protocol.
Correct.
Oh man, the things I learned.
Seriously, Reid, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I have a lot more questions, and we'd love to have you back on at some future point for some follow-ups.
I would love to be on, and I'll be very interested in hearing your experience moving forward, because I can see you're a little bit skeptical, and that's good, because all of this stuff has to be applied in context and individualized for the athletes you're working with. So I would really like to see how much you now push the weight loss limits. Like I know you're not going to do it to the extremes, but using that example of the 105 kilo guy getting down to 100 kilograms, I'll be interested in your experience moving forward, and it'll be good information for me with the athletes that I work with moving forward as well. So sure. I'm really interested to hear your experience.
Yeah,
Reid, where can we find you? Do you have any place where you're publishing your work or findings or anything on social media?
Yeah, I'm not so good at social media. I do have I've got a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/combat sports nutrition. I don't use Twitter, although I have a Twitter account, but I never post anything. I've got a ResearchGate profile. If anyone is on ResearchGate and wants to nerd out, so if you just search my name, Reid Reale, on ResearchGate. But yeah, mainly ResearchGate and Facebook.
Cool. And what are you working on right now? If you can kind of tell us a little bit over at Gatorade, are you developing some sort of superhuman formula? Are you doing anything really fun and cool?
So at Gatorade at the moment, so I've had to take a bit of a departure from my combat sports and weight cutting research that I did at the Institute of Sport in Australia. So moving forward, what we're in the immediate future, we're working on some specifically energy requirement prediction calculations. So most people use like the Harris-Benedict equations or the Cunningham equations to predict energy intake. So we're looking at developing some new equations in youth athletes, because the Gatorade facility that I'm at is in Bradenton, Florida, at the IMG Academy. So we have access to some of the best youth athletes in the country, and so we're looking at doing some RMR measurements, and then trying to correlate this with various physique characteristics. So normally people look at like height, weight, potentially muscle mass, but we want to look at how maturation fits into this. So whether we can identify athletes pre and post growth spurt, or at what stage in puberty are they at, and to see how this reflects energy requirements. Because it's really interesting just doing some metabolic rate measures on these kids. And, we'll have kids that are half my body weight with the same metabolic rate as me. And I'm a 90 kilogram guy, and these kids are 60 kilograms or, 55 kilograms, and their energy requirements are through the roof. And surely it's got something to do with they're going through a growth period. So in the immediate future, that's what we're looking at there. I'd love to do some carbohydrate mouth rinsing research, like I talked about. And I'd like that to focus on the strength training world there. And I've actually had some conversations with a colleague actually about, funny you mention this, about getting a group of weightlifters. This would be more of a hobby project for us. We'll probably do it on our weekends, but getting some weightlifters and doing like a crossover study where they compete at their walk around weight, and we measure their performance relative to weight, and then get them to do like a weight cut using some of the methods that we've talked about today, and then see if they can maintain performance and just see what their competitive advantage would be. There's actually a study that came out in the past few months. I forget who the authors were, where they looked at this. This was in Europe, I believe, where they looked at athletes that cut weight and athletes that didn't cut weight, and in weightlifters, and found no difference in performance. But it's like there's a lot of research that's looked at combat sport athletes and even rowers, like lightweight rowers that compete in weight categories. But there's very limited research looking at weightlifters and powerlifters in terms of weight cutting. So if possible, I'd like to do some of that, although it's not really a focus of Gatorade at the moment. But who knows? Maybe I can do some of this stuff in my spare time.
Cool. So we'll have something to talk about next time we have you on. We will have, tune in next time for the lemon, a good answer with regards to the lemon. And, this remains unanswered. This is the greatest mystery of powerlifting. And Also, maybe a practical answer to, you know, what you're looking at right there with regards to studying those weight cuts, their impacts on performance on those athletes. I know you could probably find a gang of powerlifters who would be interested in doing that in Florida in particular. It's pretty densely populated with powerlifters. If you're at all interested in seeing a competition, we do have our Raw National Championship coming up in October, which we're anticipating over 1,000 athletes competing during that week. And it's actually the biggest powerlifting competition in the world. So that could be pretty fun for you to see if you haven't had an opportunity.
For sure, I would love that, and we'll connect after this and set that up.
Absolutely. All right, guys. As always, I am Hani_TSA on Instagram and anywhere where I'm worth finding. Bryce and Joe are going to be the same pattern there with Bryce_TSA and Joe_TSA. Thank you for joining us, listening to the Strength Athlete Podcast one more time. Shout out to our sponsor, LVD Fitness. They are donating clean water with every item sold. You can find them at www.lvdfitness.com. And thanks all. That's it, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.